For years, Burkina Faso had been a quiet pawn in a much larger game, a game where the rules were set in Paris, and the rewards were taken far from African soil. But one man, a 34-year-old soldier named Ibrahim Traoré, would change the game entirely. In just 72 hours, he would carry out an operation so daring, so unexpected, that it would send shockwaves through the highest offices of the French government. This is the untold story of the 72 hours that terrified France. It started on a Tuesday morning in Ouagadougou, the capital. The sun had barely risen when a coded message arrived at the presidential office. It came from a source deep within the city, someone who had been quietly watching French diplomatic movements for months. The message was short, but it carried enough weight to change history. The evidence is still here. But not for long. Traoré immediately understood. For weeks, rumors had been circulating about a set of secret documents hidden inside a heavily guarded French compound. These were not ordinary diplomatic files. They were said to contain proof of hidden gold shipments, bank transactions worth millions, and political deals designed to keep Burkina Faso under France's influence. If the rumors were true, these papers could expose decades of exploitation. But if France realized the Burkinabé government was aware of them, they would be moved or destroyed within days. There was no time to waste. That afternoon, in a dimly lit meeting room at the presidential palace, Traoré gathered 6 of his most trusted military officers. Phones were left outside. Curtains were drawn. The room was silent, except for the rustle of papers and the occasional scratch of a pen. Traoré spread a satellite photo of the French compound on the table. "This is our target," he said. "We have 72 hours to secure the evidence. After that, it will vanish, and so will our chance to prove the truth." The plan had Day 1. The approach chat 2 o'clock hours under a moonless sky. 3 unmarked trucks rolled quietly out of a military base on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. Inside sat an elite unit of Burkinabé soldiers, handpicked by Traoré himself. They wore no insignia, no identifying marks, and their faces were covered by black masks. As they neared the French compound, the city seemed to hold its breath. The compound's outer gates were manned by armed guards, and surveillance cameras watched every angle. A frontal assault would be suicide. Instead, the team used a plan based on weeks of careful observation. They had discovered a small service entrance used by maintenance crews to access electrical systems. On this night, the soldiers approached it disguised as utility workers responding to a power issue. A brief exchange with the gatekeeper, a mix of French, local dialect, and technical jargon, was enough to get them inside. Once past the outer perimeter, they moved like shadows, splitting into pairs to sweep the compound. Meanwhile, at the presidential palace, Traoré sat in near darkness. A small radio receiver on the desk in front of him. Every few minutes, a short-coded phrase came through. First, building secure. Second, building clear. Documents located. The soldiers moved quickly, but methodically. In one office, they found filing cabinets stuffed with contracts, invoices, and correspondence. In another, they located a locked room with reinforced walls inside, a safe as tall as a man. They worked silently to crack it open. When the door finally swung wide, the air inside was cool and metallic. Stacks of gold bars gleamed under the dim light, each stamped with refinery marks from Marseille and Lyon. Beside them were sealed envelopes marked Confidential Defense, France's highest level of secret. Day 2, the countermove. The operation had been quiet, but not invisible. By morning, Paris knew something had happened. Inside the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, emergency meetings were underway. One official slammed a folder shut. "If we go public, they'll demand to see the documents," he said. Another leaned back in his chair, his voice low. "Then we don't go public. We make them feel the consequences quietly." In Ouagadougou, Traoré was already anticipating the backlash. The seized files were too valuable, not just for what they revealed, but for what they represented. He ordered them moved immediately to 3 separate, undisclosed locations. The gold was transported under heavy guard to the National Treasury. But the real danger was not over. Foreign operatives were now in the city, moving silently, searching for ways to retrieve or destroy the evidence. That day, Burkinabé security forces shadowed suspicious vehicles, intercepted encrypted communications, and set up false trails to confuse any hostile pursuit. Every hour felt like a test of endurance. Traore barely slept, reviewing security. Updates deep into the night. The weight of the mission pressed on him if even one file was lost. It could undo everything. Day 3, the message by dawn, the tension in the capital was almost unbearable. Traore knew that the longer he stayed silent, the more control France had over the narrative. That morning, he addressed the nation. Standing before cameras, wearing his green military uniform and red beret, he spoke not of the operations details but of its meaning. Burkina Faso, he said, will no longer be a land to be plundered. We will protect our resources, our people, and our sovereignty, no matter who stands in our way. The crowd gathered outside the palace erupted in cheers. Flags waved. But behind the applause was a growing awareness. Something big had happened. And it had rattled powerful people far away from Burkina Faso. Later that day, the aftermath, in the weeks that followed, rumors of the 72-hour mission spread through Ouagadougou streets. No one knew the full story, but the whispers painted a picture of a young leader who had walked straight into the lion's den and emerged with its secrets. Across Africa, the story took on a life of its own. In Mali, Guinea, and Niger, people began asking the same question. If Burkina Faso could challenge France, why couldn't they? In Paris, the operation was discussed. In hushed tones, far from public view. The official position was silence. To admit the raid had happened would be to admit the existence of the evidence. Months later, portions of the seized documents began appearing in investigative reports. Journalists published stories about gold shipments worth billions, secret mining concessions, and political payments made to ensure African compliance. France called the reports misleading. But for millions of Africans, the details didn't matter. What mattered was the symbolism for the first time in years. Someone had taken a stand and refused to bow. Today, the official record still does not acknowledge the mission. It remains an unspoken chapter in Burkina Faso's modern history. But in the cafes, markets, and dusty side streets of Ouagadougou, people speak of it with pride. They call it the 72 hours that terrified France. And at the center of it all stands Ibrahim Traoré, a man who knew that some risks are worth everything, even if the whole world is against you. History will remember those who acted when others stayed silent. And in those 72 hours, Ibrahim Traoré acted.